bright fluorescent lights, beeps that squeaked and honked and cawed like metallic birds. Nurses and doctors bustled about, not even giving me a second look, as they walked in and out of rooms, struggled to put on latex gloves, compared notes, and carried blood samples. I was on the 8th floor of the ICU at St. Louis University Hospital. All around me were people providing care to those too ill to be on the medical floor. People whose hearts had stopped or were going too fast. People on machines and ventilators whose bodies were failing from liver damage due to substance abuse. People who were recovering from self-inflicted wounds of attempted suicide. Today I was going to see James, a triple gunshot wound victim who had been here in the hospital since before my CPE program started. He was going on 7 weeks now in the hospital, and I was used to seeing him every week. James was 46, but looked 83, and as I approached his room, I noticed a trach or a breathing device on his neck. Once again, James was unable to talk. I gave James a smile as I lathered my hands in hand sanitizer and entered the room. "Hi, James. Is it okay if I come in and talk to you for a little bit?" James shrugged. "How are you, James?" James frowned and shrugged again. I knew what he meant. "I know you've been here for a long time." James looked at me with big blue eyes. He started a series of gestures that I couldn't understand, and I started guessing what he needed. With each guess, food, water, music, a pillow? He shook his head and grew more frustrated. "How about a blanket?" James' eyes brightened and he started to nod. Clearly, I finally got it, and with the nurse's help, I was able to grab a blanket and put it over him. I looked at James. "Would you like me to stay?" To my surprise, he nodded at me. I may have seen 100 other patients that summer, but James's eyes will remain seared into my mind forever. I knew in that moment how much I couldn't help James, as much as I wanted to. All I could do was just be there. And for the next 15 minutes or so, as I sat with James and watched TV with him, I realized that was really all he wanted. CPE this summer at St. Louis University Hospital was equal parts challenging, rewarding, and transformational. I helped hold people in their most difficult moments. The terror of arriving at the emergency department after a fall, hearing the news that a child was terminally ill. From broken bones to stopped hearts, I was a chaplain for some version of it. I could fill several sermons with what I learned, and I'm sure I will in the years to come, as I continue to digest and gain value from my experiences. But today, I want to share with you the most important thing that I learned. I learned that we as clergy are responsible to sit with others who are in pain and discomfort. We have to see it, to name it, to guide gently or strongly, depending on our assessment, and above all, to be present. In moments of being present, nothing else matters. Nothing else exists. It's just you and the face of the other in pain. Job and his friends serve as a model in our tradition for sitting with others in pain. At the beginning of his narrative, Job has lost all of his material wealth, all of his assets, and all of his children without any reason or explanation. While in mourning, 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, traveled together to comfort and console Job. The next verses read, "And when their eyes saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices in bitter wails, and each tore his clothing and threw dust into the air onto his head. And they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights. Yet no one spoke a word to him, for they saw the magnitude of his pain." Once Job begins to speak about his pain, however, his friends respond, and they try to come up with answers to Job's unbelievable amount of suffering. They say, "Your children must have sinned, or you must have. Therefore, you deserve this punishment." They say, "God works in mysterious ways, and understanding him is beyond our comprehension." Job refutes these answers, saying that he will not compromise his integrity, and calls for an audience with God. Job remains in his suffering. He names it, and he wades through the difficult questions. Job's friends represent both a positive model for sitting with another in pain and a negative model for how to guide one through it. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar mimic Job's mourning, getting on his level literally and becoming companions with Job as he experiences the magnitude of his pain, which transcends words. They sit with him in the same way that I sat with James in the ICU hospital room, without needing or trying to fix anything, just being there. After Job's eloquent, heartbreaking monologue of his deep pain, however, his friends try to fix it, and thus we have the second model. They try to explain, rationalize, and justify. And that's where Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar fail as friends and as caregivers. Job's friends needed to continue their first model, to sit with Job and meet him in his pain, to validate it without justifying its cause or its effect. Sometimes, though, the pain of others can become just too difficult for us to see. Eventually, our minds turn to other things, perhaps because we find it so difficult to face our own fears and our own mortality. We could be quick to demonize Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar for their behavior, because who in their right mind would suggest that Job's children deserve to die? Well, people who just witnessed an absolutely horrific tragedy and are trying to make sense of it. Job's friends are only human, and they probably fear for their own lives as well as the lives of their children. Just the potential of no reason, no logic, no answers, that can be too much to bear. And that's what CPE forces us to do, to sit in the messy, difficult places, sometimes with the same patients, sometimes with different people each day, and be present with them. Judaism, along with every other religion, has answers as to why tragedies, both large and small, can happen to us. But in the hospital, in the waiting room, and in the morgue, those answers are not the most important thing. French Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas says, "Since the other, that is any other person, looks at me, I am responsible for them. Their responsibility is incumbent upon me. As a chaplain, I must be present for the pain, discomfort, and sadness of my patients and their families. As a rabbi, I must be present for the stress, worries, and pain of my congregants, staff, and community members and their families." Sometimes there are no words, and that's when it can be the most powerful. One patient I enjoyed meeting the most was Ben, a Jewish patient who was diagnosed with a particularly nasty form of cancer this past January. Prayer and ritual were very important to Ben, and over the weeks I gave him Shabbat candlesticks, a JPS Bible, and printed Shabbat prayers so that he could celebrate in the hospital. During one of our conversations, we talked about his frequent visits and how they might interfere with Ben's High Holy Days experience. I had a thought. I wanted to pull away, but I knew for that exact reason that I had to say what I was thinking. "Ben," I said, "how do you feel about Unatana Tokef? This High Holidays will be the first time that you say who shall live and who shall die since your cancer diagnosis." And the look on his face, I can't even describe it. That conversation was really hard. That realization and his silence afterwards was a really uncomfortable place to live in. But he thanked me afterwards. Ben said, "Thank you. Now I know that it's coming up, and this Elul, I can prepare for it." No one else in that hospital, save for the other Jewish chaplain, could have been present for Ben in that capacity and in that moment. That's the power of what all of us can do. Atem nitzavim, ye are standing this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your heads, your tribes, your elders, and your officers, even all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, thy stranger that is in the midst of thy camp, from the hewer of thy wood to the drawer of thy water, that thou shouldest enter into the covenant of the Lord thy God. For me, the traditional language fits the tone of the seminal passage of this week's Torah portion, because it's not just a speech, it is a calling. This May, I will enter a special rabbinic covenant, rabbinic smicha, one that I make not just with God, but with every Jewish soul, those who are there and those who are not yet here. I pledge to sit with and be present for each and every face. I pledge to stand with those who are marginalized, with those who are disenfranchised, and with those who are lost. Now, I have some advice for you, and I speak now as if it's just you and me, my future rabbinical clergy or current rabbinical clergy. You are welcome to take or leave my advice from what I've learned over the years and what I learned this past summer at HUC. Advice number 1. It is almost impossible to sit and be present with other people's discomfort, pain, and stress unless you sit with your own. Now, I'm not saying to go out and break a bone or get ill or something like that. Instead, I'm encouraging you on this very end of Elul to sit in your own deep, dark insecurities. Reflect on your triggers and on your fears. What scares you? What angers you? What do you need to deal with so that when, not if, when a congregant or a patient brings that up inside of you, you can name it, you can see it, you can put it aside for later, and you can continue to give your best care possible. I encourage you to find a professional to help you be your guide and your advocate on that journey. Like Job's friends, the magnitude of our work can be too much to bear sometimes, and it's too easy to therefore slip into unhealthy habits and burnout. So therapy might not be required at HUC, but I think it is required for our line of work and for our own mental and spiritual well-being. Advice number 2, find a group on the margins or thy stranger that is in the midst of thy camp that resonates with you and work with them. There are a multitude of avenues for this at HUC, such as the Beit Tshuva immersion and internship, CPE, Our House, and other opportunities during the year. But you could also ask your student pulpit or your congregation to visit homebound congregants, to visit a hospital, or to visit a local jail. You could walk into a VA office, a homeless shelter, a Planned Parenthood, and offer to volunteer. This fall, I'm leading several Shabbat services at nursing homes, and it is among the most meaningful work I have done during my time at HUC. Advice number 3, claim your authority. This advice is as much for me as it is for you. This job is holy. It can really, really change people. And for a long time, that really, really scared me. And honestly, it scared me so much that it drove me away from congregational work. I thought, I'm not worthy of that power. But I am, and so is every person sitting here too. Sometimes we just have to push ourselves to lean into those uncomfortable spaces, to say words like cancer and pain and death, and to know that we do have a huge, weighty responsibility when we go there. But we're also human, and what a blessing it is to be given the permission and the authority to be in that space with another person. Let's use it well. There is one face we cannot see. The divine face is shielded from us as it was shielded from Moses in Parshat Ki Tisa, because human beings can't handle the full radiance of God. And yet, the final verse of Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, is Yisa Adonai Panav Elecha V'yasem Lecha Shalom. May the divine presence lift her face to you and grant you peace. My prayer and my blessing for us all here today is that we see the divine presence in each and every face of another. May we see it in the person next to us, in the sea of faces in our congregations this high holidays, on the religious school playgrounds, in our offices, in our hospital rooms, in our jail cells, and on our streets. As we continue to heal the brokenness in ourselves and in our communities, may we also grant each other and ourselves true peace. So Araim Tovim.